When violence breaks out, people want it to stop. Ceasefire agreements can make space for discussion. National or international leaders can facilitate talks to stop the fighting. Trusted local actors like the religious community and women leaders can also get involved. There are several kinds of ceasefires. The terms are often used interchangeably. A truce can be a first step to stop the fighting. It is an informal, temporary, often spoken agreement and is often arranged locally. A cessation of hostilities is a declaration of the suspension of fighting. It can be used to start a more formal end to violent conflict. It is usually a written agreement, but it can be provisional and non-binding. A formal ceasefire is a negotiated, binding agreement to stop the fighting and help establish a more permanent peace. It can contain the responsibilities of armed actors, mechanisms to ensure that all parties comply with the terms of the agreement, and procedures to address violations. Ceasefires can take place at the local, provincial, national, or international level. Sometimes ceasefires can be done unilaterally, meaning they are decided by one group. Why does gender matter in ceasefire agreements and processes? Women, men, boys and girls experience fighting and its consequences differently. Ceasefire agreements must take these differences into account. During war, men and boys who are non-combatants are at risk of being rounded up, detained, or forcibly conscripted or executed. The majority of civilians who are forced to flee are women and children. A humanitarian corridor should be accessible, and the food and medical assistance should be relevant to everyone. There should be safe passage for all civilians. Even if weapons are silenced, warring parties can continue to harass civilians by using sexual violence. And this can trigger cycles of vigilantism and reignite warfare. In 2008, by adopting Resolution 1820, the United Nations Security Council for the first time recognized sexual violence as a threat to international peace and security. Still, very little is being done to prevent this violence. Ceasefire agreements should include the prohibition of sexual violence, so that when the guns stop, sexual violence does not continue. Women peacebuilders can also enable and inform ceasefire negotiations. Based on their knowledge of communities or ability to access and talk to warring groups. In Yemen, a young woman led a group of local volunteers to facilitate a ceasefire between community leaders to end their conflict over water access. Women can also help to ensure that everyone abides by the ceasefire agreement, so that the violence ends and permanent peace is more likely. In the Philippines, a volunteer civilian monitoring group was formed to engage with women and sensitize men to the different impacts of war on men, women, boys and girls. The group later joined the international monitoring team. 8 steps to ensure an inclusive and gendered ceasefire. Mediation teams should 1. Involve local women peacebuilders in dialogue and confidence-building measures. 2. Have a gender and inclusion expert supporting the talks. 3. And raise the gender dimension ahead of the talks so parties commit to the issue. 4. Donors should allocate funding to women peacemakers so they can participate effectively in all stages of the process. The text of ceasefire agreements must 5. Contain an inclusive definition of ceasefire, reflecting different types of violence that impact women and men differently. Sexual violence must be prohibited. 6. A timeline to stop the fighting. 7. Provisions for a humanitarian corridor that reflects the different needs of civilian men, women, boys and girls. 8. Agreement should require that monitoring and verification teams comprise a balance of women and men with expertise in relevant issues like weapons storage, and documenting and investigating human rights violations, including conflict-related sexual violence. Inclusive ceasefire agreements are the foundations for an achievable and sustainable peace for all.